Hello and welcome. He was wrongfully deported and tortured, but the US Supreme Court rejected his appeal. So how will Maher Arar clear his name? The Syrian-Canadian software engineer was seized in 2002 while changing planes in New York, but that action was based on incorrect Canadian intelligence linking him to a terrorist group. Arar was held for 12 days and then expelled to Syria, where he was tortured for a year. In October 2003, he was released and sent back to Canada. In 2007, Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper formally apologized to Arar, and he was awarded around $10 million in compensation by the government. But this month, in a major setback, the Supreme Court rejected Maher Arar's lawsuit against US officials accountable for rendition and torture. So today we ask, does America now get a license to arbitrarily detain and deport suspects? Let us know what you think. Join in with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email or call in. On the show today we have Maher Arar, who is the best known victim of the process known as extraordinary rendition. It's his first interview with a major international TV news channel after that Supreme Court decision in the US rejecting his appeal last month. He's still banned from travel to the US, so he joins us from Ottawa in Canada. And from Chicago we have Mariela Hood, the lawyer representing Maher Arar. She's senior staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights in the US. I welcome both of you to the show. And Maher, if I can start with you and talk about this rejection by the US Supreme Court. Where does that leave you? Where does that leave your case? Do you have any further recourse?
Well, I do, in terms of not judicial ones, though. I can complain to you in, for example, other international bodies, but there's also an ongoing RCMP investigation in Canada for just to give a little bit of information about this. This investigation started about 4 years ago. It is mandated to investigate the role of Syrian as well as American officials who were complicit in my torture.
Now, until there is some kind of resolution in the US, you stay on the watch list, on America's watch list. What direct impact does that have on your day-to-day life? How does it affect you?
Well, as you know, there was an inquiry here in Canada that cleared my name, but the fact that my name is still on the watch list keeps this little bit of cloud over my head, and it's extremely frustrating for me. Every time I want to travel, even domestically, I feel psychologically troubled. So the fact that I used to travel a lot before for business, and now I'm not able to do that, it's extremely restraining for me.
Mm-hmm. Maher, I mean, just looking at how you feel now towards the United States, considering what's happened, I mean, are you adamant to come back? Are you particularly keen to travel back to the US?
Well, even if I'm allowed to, if they remove my name from the watch list, I'm not feeling psychologically comfortable to actually travel anywhere outside Canada. I'm still living the trauma. Surprisingly, it happened about 7 or 8 years ago, but it's still with me on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. Even when I take domestic flights, I become it's very stressful for me.
We have a quote now from the Canadian Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. Canada formally and publicly, very publicly, accepted the mistake, as we mentioned, and the country's Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, had this comment to make.
The government has sent letters to both the Syrian and American governments formally objecting to the treatment of Mr. Arar. Canada has removed Mr. Arar from Canadian lookout lists, and we have specifically requested that the United States amend its own records accordingly.
Mariela Hood, very clear comment there by Stephen Harper. Why has it been so difficult to get the US to admit the same?
I don't know. I think it's just, you know, the Obama administration, like the Bush administration, is not willing to apologize, at least thus far. And, you know, now that the case has been dismissed, we are, you know, we have some hope still that the Obama administration will admit the wrongdoing of previous officials and apologize to Maher and take him off the watch list, initiate, you know, an investigation into the criminal wrongdoing of those who sent him to Syria. And prevent this from happening again. No,
but at the time, I was just asking, Maria, at the time of the Bush administration, the U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice did come out and admit that the case was mishandled. Doesn't that give you some kind of ammunition to you know, request a redress?
Well, you know, her words were ambiguous. It sounded like, you know, she might have been talking about the relationship with Canada and how the communications happened. They've never acknowledged the wrongdoing of sending Maher to Syria to be tortured, and the fact that he's still on a watch list in the United States, like Maher says, puts a taint on him and also prohibits him from traveling.
We've got a caller on the line from Toronto. Abraham joins us on the phone. Abraham, go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, thank you. I just had, what plans does Maher Arar have to pursue advocacy? Because it seems like the U.S. Supreme Court, with its conservative bias, won't take any more stand on these issues. These are political avenues, because Harper apologized just because it's politically popular. So I think ultimately it's a political decision. Thank you.
Okay, Maher?
Well, I think I've mentioned a little bit of that, but there's also the Congress option. I testified at the Congress a few years ago, and we do have some politicians in Congress who are sympathetic to the case, and they believe strongly that there was wrong that must be remedied there. So I will keep pursuing this option, as well as I will keep cooperating with the RCMP investigation in hope that this will lead to criminal charges.
Maria, there was the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in the USA ruled that the victims of extraordinary rendition cannot sue Washington for torture suffered overseas because Congress has not authorized such lawsuits. Does that mean that the onus is on Congress to enact some change?
Well, yeah, although we disagree vehemently with what the Second Circuit decided, it is up to Congress now. I mean, both, like Maher said, members of Congress have apologized to him, called on the government to apologize, and also called for compensation. So they could do that with regards to Maher, but they could also make it more clear in the law that there should be a remedy for extraordinary rendition.
Maria, beyond that formal and very public apology by Stephen Harper, is there no effort by the Canadian government to actually get involved in some way? I mean, cannot the Canadian government represent Maher in some way?
Well, I mean, certainly they can continue to put pressure on the Obama administration. Even, while we were in the Supreme Court, the Foreign Minister of Canada sent a letter making clear that Canada did not object to Maher's civil case going forward. But that didn't matter to the Supreme Court, unfortunately.
Okay, let's get a call in from London. Ahmed's on the line. Ahmed, go ahead.
Oh, hello, yes. Tongue-in-cheek, I do believe the American has the right to do whatever they do to the rest of the world, because our leaders have made America a kind of a ghost, and they have let America do whatever they want to do. It is the fault of our Muslim leaders throughout the world. Have they ever raised their voice against America? And why is it? Is it not the fault of the United Nations that only 5 countries have the veto power?
Okay. Ahmed,
yes.
let me ask Maher this. Do you get a sense that the US is in no way accountable? Is there a sense that a case like yours is essentially pushed to one side? I mean, apart from Canada's public apology, but is it pushed to one side because the US effectively stands unaccountable to anyone?
I think it's very clear. Let me emphasize the fact that my case is not an isolated one. As far as we know, it's unique in the sense that I was the only person rendered from US soil. But we know of hundreds of other cases where people have been rendered from Europe and from other parts of the world to Guantanamo and to third world countries where they have been tortured, and some of them have been disappeared. Now, this wouldn't have happened without the cooperation of those dictatorships countries like Egypt, Morocco, and others, and Syria, of course. But what is frightening, though, is a supposedly democratic country like the US is actually doing this. It gives the green light to those countries to keep torturing their own people forever.
In fact, I'll quote you here, Maher, from your blog where you've talked about this. You said, "My case is unique in the sense that I was the only person who was rendered from US soil, but hundreds of other human beings have been rendered by the CIA and handed over to brutal regimes. No one knows how many of these people have died under torture or completely disappeared." Considering your experience in Syria, being tortured and being detained like that, how has it changed your outlook on life? How has it affected you as a person?
Well, yes, I was harmed in a way, psychologically, mentally, and physically, but it did open my eyes on things I have not seen before. Before this happened to me, I was just an engineer working 9 to 5 like any other engineer. But my experience transformed me in the sense that I now give a lot of importance to human rights issues. I now see a lot of injustice being done in the name of fighting terror. And I must speak out about this. We have human beings being tortured and killed, and many of them have not been given due process. And this is not fair. The United States has to be held accountable. If they want peace and in the world, if they want to spread democracy in the world, they have to act rather than just talk. Right. And right now, the people in the Middle East, where the United States is trying to spread democracy, is pointing the finger back and saying, look, you've been torturing people, you've been locking people up in Guantanamo, you've been cooperating with dictatorships, and so it's double standard, right, basically.
Well, Maher Arar, 2 days after being sworn into office on the 22nd of January 2009, President Obama signed an executive order entitled Lawful Interrogations, which effectively sought to end extraordinary renditions. So presumably, it's on paper that the US doesn't do this, but has it been enforced?
Well, what the executive order did was actually, it says that they want to prevent torture, but that they still will allow renditions for detention and interrogation. And, as Maher's case shows, no amount of monitoring or assurances can prevent torture. I mean, there's no reason for the U.S. to be sending people to other countries for detention and interrogation other than to have them tortured or arbitrarily detained, which is also illegal.
We're going to take a very short break here. More on this extraordinary case when we return. Don't go away. Welcome back. Detention and torture without the right to appeal. Where does this leave Canadian citizen Maher Arar, whose effort to clear his name is effectively blocked by a US Supreme Court decision? We're discussing that with him. He's joining us from Ottawa in Canada. And from Chicago, we have his lawyer, Maher Arar, who's a senior staff attorney at the Centre for Constitutional Rights. We have a caller on the line who's been waiting patiently. William in London. Thanks for that. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. My name is William. I'm actually a director of a think tank here in UK called CANA UK, and we have been monitoring UK foreign policy for some years. And in fact, we made a press release a couple of weeks ago about this Maher case. And I'm very glad to see Maher on television. What I'd like to say is what we said in our press release was basically the United States seems to have slipped entirely into a realm of almost institutional criminality. I mean, how can they justify abducting people from their countries and then sending them in extraordinary rendition?
Okay.
It's just absolutely appalling.
William, thank you for that. I'm going to, Maher Arar, if I can also put what William has said there in the context of an email that came in from a viewer by the name of Uruchukwe Ede, who says, only in the US can people like Arar take their cases to court. In countries like Nigeria, Afghanistan and Syria, torture never goes to court, and yet people want to berate the US without evidence. They should direct their outrage towards those who would kill innocents in the name of Sharia. So obviously there are some people who feel that it's still better in the US than in other places, but of course William was saying there the US seems to have slipped completely from the realms of being very honest about its attitude towards human rights.
Well, Maher never did get his day in court. His case was rejected at every turn. It never progressed at all. And he received no due process before he was sent to Syria. He was, denied access to court. His access to counsel was interfered with. He had a right to go to court to challenge his removal to Syria because he said vehemently and repeatedly that he would be tortured. And there's a statute providing him the right to go to court, and the U.S. officials prevented him from doing that. So they completely undermined the rule of law, and the court condoned that by not providing a remedy.
Maher, what do you know about the sequence of events that led to you being detained and undergoing that extraordinary rendition? How hard has it been to get accurate information on the sequence of events and what happened?
Do you mean from U.S. government?
Yes, I guess the whole process from those who actually initially highlighted you and then passed on the information to the U.S. government. How easy has it been to get a clear sequence of events and accurate information?
You mean after I came back to Canada, trying to get access to information?
Right. I mean, by
from the U.S.
Right now, at this stage, how much do you know, really, truly and accurately about what happened, the sequence that put you to where you are?
Well, Well, my lawyers filed access to information request, and we did receive very few documents, most of them redacted, but it took them sometimes over 5 or 6 years to give us those documents. We still do not know a lot of what happened, but it seems to point to the fact that the decision to send me to Syria was taken at the highest levels. And maybe Maria can speak more about that.
Maria, what light has been shed on the sequence of events?
Well, you know, the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General actually conducted a report investigating the immigration officials. So not DOJ, not the White House, but at least the immigration officials. And it basically found that the immigration department, or the low-level immigration officials, found that Maher would likely be tortured if sent to Syria. And that decision was overturned at the highest levels. The Inspector General also found that the so-called assurances from Syria were vague and ambiguous, and that they were never apparently verified even. So when the Inspector General was asked by Congress, you know, is it possible that Maher was sent to Syria by US officials to be interrogated under unlawful conditions, he said unequivocally, yes, that's possible.
Maher, I know that, as you've pointed out before the break, you're not the only person who has undergone this, or the only one from US soil directly, but what I gather you've been fairly active in trying to highlight the cause for others, you know, those others who have been undergoing this process or have undergone this process. What are you doing specifically?
Well, I've recently started a web-based magazine, which also includes a web-based TV, highlighting the injustices being done to people who are detained at Guantanamo and people who have been rendered. But I think you were referring to the 4 or 3 other cases in Canada here who have been, I would say, indirectly rendered to their countries of birth and tortured. But yes, I've started this magazine. It's called prismmagazine.com if your viewers would like to visit it, and basically I'm focusing on national security issues both in Canada, US, and to some extent in Europe, and I find that we as citizens can do a lot to counter what governments are doing worldwide with the help of the internet.
Now, Maria, on this issue of Europe, the Council of Europe apparently is investigating rendition under George W. Bush's administration, citing the use of European airspace and soil in the transfer and transportation of prisoners who are under rendition. Now, it's believed that it's affected a lot of Europeans too. Are we likely to see more skeletons coming out of the cupboard?
I think we probably are. I mean, because the U.S. is unwilling to investigate, you know, there have been not only the Canadian law enforcement criminal investigation, you know, Italy actually prosecuted and convicted CIA officials for another extraordinary rendition. There are other countries that are willing to try to hold U.S. officials accountable because the U.S. is not. So I do hope that, you know, people will continue to investigate, release information, and try to prosecute.
Now, how much has this case also highlighted the use of secret detention centers that the U.S. has offshore? Not just the case of Maher, for example, who was sent off to Syria, but actual US-run detention centers.
Well, I think it highlights how there's no accountability by the United States for any of that. You know, no torture survivor. There are, you know, thousands and thousands of torture survivors from the Bush administration. Not one of them has received justice by a U.S. court or by the executive. There are still secret detention centers. There are still people in Guantanamo. You know, the Obama administration just hasn't done enough to correct the wrongs of the Bush administration. So they're becoming, you know, they're becoming the Obama administration's problems, and they are.
I was wondering, actually, Maria, to what degree the current administration is carrying the legacy of the Bush administration in that post 9/11 era, where there was pressure to produce some sort of results to show for the government to show the public, I guess, to instill confidence that something was being done. Is it really just a continued legacy?
I mean, it is continued, and in some ways, the Obama administration is exacerbating it. You know, they're conducting more targeted assassinations than ever before. The Bush administration released more people from Guantanamo than the Obama administration has. So, you know, there are, and the fact that the Obama administration is unwilling to apologize for the wrongs, the obvious wrongs of a previous administration, makes you wonder what's going on.
Maher, we had a viewer in the UK who wrote in an email to our Facebook page. Stacey Ali says, the US has no human rights values. It makes us wonder how many may have been detained for, quote, terrorist reasons who are actually innocent. There is no way for Maher Arar to clear his name because the US will never apologize. Do you feel that is the case? Is it really a completely stuck situation? I mean, do you ever expect there to be a positive resolution to your situation as far as the US is concerned?
Well, the actions taken by the previous administration as well as this current administration give the impression that their definition of human is very much different from the rest of the world. It just seems that if you happen to be an American, then this is what's human. Other than that, if you do not belong to this American race, then you don't have any human rights. So and that's very clear, actually, just to look at the Guantanamo cases and many other cases, even those cases not related to terrorism. No. So it was my hope that this Obama administration would do things differently from the previous one, but unfortunately they're continuing on the same path, if not even worse.
All right. Well, Maher Arar, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your story. Maria Lahud, thank you also for giving us an explanation to the background of the case.
Thank you.
We thank you for being with us too. Now remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on topics and post your questions and comments. On the next show, 2010 A Space Odyssey. What's life like in orbit? And what are the challenges exploring the final frontier? For the first time, astronauts aboard the International Space Station talk to Al Jazeera about their mission and experience. Be sure to tune in for that unique show from me and the team. We'll see you next time.